you guys all for being here. It really means a lot to see all your faces here. I see people from all walks of life. Like I see friends from college and from my first writing days, from my later writing days. So it really means a lot that you all are here. And I see a REMA board member too here, so thanks so much for being here. And I have a couple of other special guests in the audience tonight. My younger kid, who is here and just recently moved back to the area, so it's really lovely to have him back here and be able to be here tonight. And especially also my husband, without whom there's no way I could do what I do. He has been my rock, supporting me and grounding me since the day we met 34 years ago. So, and he still rocks my world. Thanks to Kate, especially too, for joining me here this evening, taking time to talk with me and read with me, and looking forward to all of our discussion tonight and your questions later tonight too. I have been such a fan of yours and your work through the years that I'll let you start our conversation.
Okay. Well, I was looking back through emails to figure out when Kate and I became friends, and I got to 2008, and we had met at a loft event, and then we were going back and forth, both of us shopping around our first memoirs, and it was like, oh, I've been rejected, and I was like, or you said that, and I was like, actually, just call them passes. It didn't actually make it feel any better. So we were going back and forth, and then one of these very early ones, her youngest, it was very funny, and I'm so glad you're here, but she said, my youngest, who was then 12 years old, has told me I don't have a voice, and I need to develop my voice. And I had started laughing really, really hard, because I was like, of course Kate had a voice, and it was fun, but it felt like a very 12-year-old thing to say.
That's probably true.
Yeah, and I'm going to read about my now 15, but she wasn't 12 at the time, but she was 14, so, or 13, so, yeah, you know. But we have been on panels and read each other work and read together, and it's been super fun. Yeah.
And I remember you were writing about running, getting back into running right after having a baby, and so when we met, you had just had this piece published in the Minneapolis St. Paul.
I think it was Minnesota Parent.
Minnesota Parent, and it was just so impressive. It was like, oh my God, that's really good. And you still have had those two things in your writing, have played a part in your writing, writing about our kids, our kids, an important part of our writing, and writing about running ended up playing a role in your writing too, but you've always been a step ahead of me, Kate.
Stop. I'm so excited to talk to Kate tonight, because she has 2 books that are out, and most of our kind of conversation you're going to read from Iron Horse Cowgirls, but like I really want to ask you too about Lady Ref. So this is we both have experienced ghostwriting, and I want to know first how you got connected with Shannon and this, and you can't see it because I'm sitting right in front of the cover, but First Lady Ref in the NFL.
So it was, well, actually, here, I'm going to do this, because it was pretty wild how I got connected to her. Can you hear me here?
What was that?
What was that? Oh my God, I'll come back to that. It was pretty wild getting connected with Shannon, because she had, I had been a preliminary judge for the Minnesota Book Awards, and an agent was on the panel with me, and and I didn't know her very well, but a couple of weeks after that, she had reached out, she had DM'd me and said, hey, would you ever consider ghostwriting? Because I've got this woman, she was the first NFL referee, and she started out as a 6-time national judo champion. Would you be interested in working with her? And I had done some judo in college, so I felt like I could do some about that. But I wanted to know how she made the leap then to becoming an NFL official. And Shannon needed some help developing her story according to the agent. But more importantly, I wanted to know how she could remain so cool under pressure. And so a similar thing was with working with the Iron Horse Cowgirls then, because how Louise Shervin made that leap from learning to ride on a gravel road in front of her house, like I did as a kid riding around at our farm, to within a couple of years being able to ride with up to, to be able to ride circles around everyone. So
here we are.
Here we are. In the 1940s, she was asked to be a part of Putt Mossman's stunt riding show, and he had been like the Evel Knievel of the first half of the 20th century. And so Louise did one of these motordromes. This is not her here, but that's an example of the kind of motordrome she rode around in. So, so before I get into that, let me tell a little bit more about Shannon's efforts as Lady Ref. So her story is about what drove her, what she was willing to give up because in order to be the first NFL official as a woman. The only reason it turned out that she got into the martial arts was because her mom wouldn't let her sign up for football. So she did that instead. So between her 2-a-days for judo and a swim practice, she did 2-a-days for both sports. She would sneak down to play with the neighbor boys to play some football with them. And so at first they totally underestimated her, but it turned out that with judo she was pretty hard to tackle. She knew how to stand her ground. And so she was tough, and early on she was the youngest athlete to train at Colorado's Olympic Center. So women weren't even a demonstration sport at the time. So she, after 6 times as national champion, she figured she had the end of the line. So she got involved with the church. She actually became involved with Bible quiz, and that actually turned out to be a really good training for her to be able to anticipate calls. So, and then she realized, oh hey, I could actually get into officiating maybe for this sport that I really love. And so you can imagine at her first training session, all the guys in the room thinking, what the heck is she doing here? But it turned out she asked some really great questions. And so that turned out to be a really important thing for both the women, that they were asking really great questions. And then they realized that she was the real deal. So she started out with Pop Warner, and then she rose the ranks to become the first Division I referee in the country. She was the one wearing the white hat making the calls. And then from there, she was pulled up to the NFL during the 2012 lockout. She always held her own in spite of the pushback that she would get, in spite of an assault, as a USA Today article noted, and focused on. But every time she was held down, she found a way to get back up. And she wanted to offer others inspiration, show a way forward. And the question is, was there a way for her to get to the NFL without, other than being a replacement ref for them? So you'll have to read that to find out, and decide for yourself. But I think that she's got a really great story, but I might be biased. So that's Lady Ref.
Okay, I'm gonna change orders a little bit here. Because for me, like, you've been spending the last few years writing other people's stories, and that's not easy to do, I know, because I did it as well. And so there's the crafting of it, but you also have to be excited about it. So can you talk a little bit about what made you want to take on these projects?
There's a couple different things at play too, because being able, you get stuck trying to write your own stories, trying to see this, where the forest for the trees kind of thing, unable to see the forest for the trees. And there's something about writing other people's stories. It's so much easier to say, okay, this is the beginning, middle, and end. This is how to write it. This is what to bring out. This is, and then like I need to know the motivation here. Like, what's the motivation that I need to include? So it actually was a good kind of regrouping point for me as I was writing. But and I think for both of them, getting to know, these women were so tough. they were getting into fields that were difficult to explore anyway, and these fields that men dominate. It's like they were the only one out there, and what was it that helped them stand their ground? What was it that they reached down in and pulled up and were able to help them keep going forward? It's like that's a good thing to know, I think, for anybody. So that was good. That was good.
We're going to circle back around
Okay.
about what that thing is at the end of this, for sure.
All right.
But, so, do you want to talk a little bit about how you got involved with Iron Horse?
Yes. So I met my friend Linda through the loft also, and when we met, it was again, I think it was back in 2008. For her too, and at that point, I was new to writing, and she was an established author. She had several books out already, and at that event, she kept asking about my work, and it's like, why? But it turned out that she was a birth mom, and the book that I was shopping was about me being adopted, me being my birth mom finding me through my adoptive mom's obituary. And so she was really interested in that connection. She thought we needed to do a reading together. Then she thought she needed to connect me to her publisher, which is how I ended up getting that opportunity. And then we would celebrate her accomplishments too. So she always loved writing and writing about motorcycles. She was really into it. She and her husband would take these trips, and then she would write poetry books about the motorcycles, and several other kinds of books too. And so when she was given this chance to work with all the personal photos of this woman who founded the Women's International Motorcycle Association, she had to say yes. Of course, it's like, given the chance, you have to say yes. And those photos were all from Belmason. And so she had hundreds and hundreds of personal photos of this woman who founded the first standalone, women-only led motorcycle association. So she had these photos, but not the story behind them. So as Linda was getting into it, she was having trouble doing the work that she had always loved doing. So it turned out she had brain cancer. And on her hospice bed, she handed over everything that she had. And the story, I could tell, we could both tell, it was bigger than either of us. So I promised her I would see it through. So I reached out to this woman who had an archive that Linda had identified, but that she hadn't the strength to go to between treatments. And so I set up a visit to go there in April of 2020. So COVID kind of shut that down. But that's when I got into Lady Beth, and so I could do that. And I kept returning to these amazing photos. And so when I was able to finally take that trip, when I walked through the door and saw boxes and boxes of all of these documents that this woman had, it was a historian's dream to be able to know, okay, I've got all of this information now. And they had everything down to the grocery list for the turkey run for 1942. It was like they had everything. So we went through every page, and I could finally put together the names with the faces and what these women did. And so you want to keep an eye on Gladys. You're going to want to remember her for later. And so here's Louise, and notice she's got a little brownie camera there. She worked at Kodak, and so that's part of the reason too why she had so many photos and was able to record all of her trips. And we found out then too that Louise was the first woman in Rochester to get her license. First one ever to get her driver's license. And it took her 3 years, or 2 years to talk 3 more women into getting their licenses too. So not until we went to press did I learn Myrtle's name. And that's only because of a stack of old motorcyclist magazines that Chris Summer Simmons had. And, oh, Kate, you'll like this. This Hall of Fame motorcyclist happens to be married to Pat Simmons of the Doobie Brothers.
That's awesome.
So, I know. That was pretty cool. And they met at Sturgis. So Louise learned to write at her husband's encouragement, and really what they were just trying to do is find something that they enjoyed doing together. But she said every time she tried fishing, all she would catch was minnows. So he said, well, okay, well, let's try motorcycling then. And she was a little worried. She was very worried about what the ladies at the office would think. And this was even 20 years before Marlon Brando was in that movie, The Wild Ones, in 1953. So that first time she tried riding buddy seat with George, they went down this trail in the Adirondacks that would have been way too narrow, that they couldn't have gone down if he still had the sidecar attached to his Indian Chief motorcycle. She'd ridden sidecar a few years at this point, but with that first tandem ride, she was hooked. So George could tell, and as a good husband that he was, he traded his bike in for a Harley at Season's End and bought that little Scout that he saw in the dealer's window for her. So, what's a woman to do when she gets the very thing that she's always wanted? She stuffed that bike down in the basement for all winter long, and she'd go down there every once in a while to take a peek at it and try and decide, had they done the right thing, or had they done the most foolish thing ever? Because it was the middle of the Depression. What were they going to do? Where were they going to come up with the money to afford it? So in the spring, she took 3 tries down Maiden Lane, that gravel road outside her house, while the neighbors were watching out the window. And so it took her 3 times before she could catch on. And in a few years at rallies, she'd carry 6 people on her bike at once. And then a few more years down the line, she was invited to join Pet Mossman's show. And then found the Women's International Motorcycle Association. So I wanted to know, who was this woman? Who was this woman who could ride this bike and go down that road, through a field that so few women entered, and what was it that was happening around them to drive them to do that, to ask the questions that they were asking, what was happening that affected their decisions and that steeled their resolve to go out and do these things that they did. So I love going down the path. I love digging into that, researching that. I had done some research in college about that era. I was a history major in college and had researched the 20s, women in labor movements in the 20s, and so same kind of thing. Strong women fighting against the current, trying to find a way to do the things that they love doing. So,
well, I mean, I think Linda would be very proud of this book. So,
thank you.
Bravo for
Thank
that. But it is also different to be inheriting a project, right, and a passion that was hers and you adopted it. So very different, I assume, well, I just know even from what you've just said, than writing your own memoir or even helping Shannon write her memoir. So what were some of the challenges or surprises or that you faced actually finishing this book?
You know, it was cool being able, I love digging into the history of it to find the strength of the women of it. Is the connections that were made. I've always loved being able to connect with people and with things, you know, kind of when they do these things, and being able to connect with Rima and Shayna Ravensdale out of England. Like has all this history of the group back through, and she had all this information, and so being able to pull all these things together and make a story for people just is really great. And also, you know, it's like that feeling of, you know, when I was motorcycles, it had been a while since I rode, because I had this little 75 when I was a little kid, and my dad bumped it up to 125.
Very cool, very cool. Dangerous, I'm not sure why I remember that.
That's kind of my dad. So we would ride around the farm, run over to the farmer's patch next to us. He had a strawberry patch. and we would like take a laps around that strawberry patch, and there was that one little hill where you could get just a little bit of air, but very little, because I'm very, well, Jim could tell you, when we do these trips and we rent some ATVs, even I'm slow on ATV, but it's fun to be out there, to feel that rush of being, going out there. Ash rode one with me on one of the trips on a lava field somewhere, so that was fun. So, being able to feel that rush, being able to put the reader in that moment, those were different ways to be able to connect with it.
I mean, there's some intense stuff that happens in this book.
Oh, there is.
And I mean, it's different from a memoir because you have to kind of speculate a little more. I mean, you have some of the information, but not. But there was I maybe should not give up what happens, but Louise was.
But part of it is that any time that I'm attributing an emotion to Louise or words to her, I found those in letters. That is, and so that was part of what was amazing in those documents, is that we had access to that information. It was just a matter of calling through and finding that. And also, yeah, don't give it away, because there's some stuff I want to talk about at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, but there were being able to connect with other people who knew her, and then how she shared her story with them, that affected how I wrote the story and what of the story I needed to tell. So, and that was a very important part of it, because that's why she did what she did. That's why she steeled her resolve and got out on the road. There are, it's hard to be a woman in the world sometimes, and that's one way of putting it. And so it was interesting that both these women had similar incidents like that, and both of those had to be shared as part of the story. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you did.
What about you, Kate? What drives you in you writing your stories? What surprises have you had?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think the greatest thing about being a writer is that you get to write about anything that excites you. So, I mean, I had moments being like, God, maybe I should have been a scientist, which was not a good idea at all, because I tried to do that and then I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to not read about carbon bonding. I want to sneak off and read Faulkner in the adjacent library with a carbon bonding magazine. Hemingway too, that was the summer.
Now Fitzgerald.
That summer I was like, I'm just going to read some classics and see if I still want to not do what I'm doing, which was actually true. But then I was like, oh, I really love the science part of the newspaper the best, and I should be a scientist. But that's a great thing, is you can write about anything that you're excited about. So, I mean, and I've done that with my, like when I learned to play bass guitar, and then I got really involved in like the first signed all-female band in the U.S., and I wrote about that, and
that was an amazing thing. That was a true story, which is like, it's so hard to get into that. Like, oh my God.
Long essays, which is now defunct, but, and then, like now I'm obsessed with whales, and I can just dive deep and write about whatever I want. So for me, it's that, but I don't know if I'm not in a place where I would want to write somebody else's story.
Yeah, it's hard.
At this point.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that's interesting and exciting to me that I want to explore what I'm really interested in, and I help writers by being an editor and a coach, but so I live with a lot of stories, but I don't want to spend time crafting them.
Because it takes a long time.
Years, and you make very little money. Well, I'll speak for myself.
Well,
you make
you can
very
speak
little
for me too.
Okay, I'll speak for both of us. That's what we would tell. Is that what you would tell?
Like it's hard. So because I've had a couple of people ask about ghostwriting like just this year, and it's like I don't know that I can do that right now.
I think that's the advice I told you. I would think really hard about this.
Yeah. So thank you for that advice.
I did it anyway. I'm so glad you did for these two.
For these two, I did. Yeah. It was like I couldn't not. Once I knew their story, I couldn't not. Is the thing, because they're amazing stories. But tell me more about the whales.
Oh gosh. No, honestly. I really can't open my mouth about them, or I will not stop talking about them. My husband, and I'm just going to look at the time just to give myself 1 minute to 2 minutes, 3 minutes. he's enough, Kate. That's enough. All right, you have to stop now. But I'm obsessed with orcas, and working on. Just got back from a research trip.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was supposed to be writing, but it was really research. I met with 5 scientists, and I know so much information. So if anyone wants to ask me afterwards about the endangered southern residents, I know a lot. And I can't wait to now sit down and write more. I've started writing about it, but I'm going to write more.
It's hard to move that science stuff into story.
And for me, it's if I can write something that people will read and it will get them to think about the choices they're making, and I mean, I'm writing to support the scientists that are trying to save them, and that feels like a calling at this point. God, I'm using that term, but my dad would approve of that. He was a minister, and he would say, "Oh yeah, that's a calling." Yeah. But I think also understanding our motivations as writers, I think what I'm hearing you say too about both of these books is the power of these women in history,
Yes.
breaking ground, doing things that we all have to do as women now, even now, when our rights are being stripped away all the time. That matters to have those stories out in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
So-
I think once you know, if you know this, and the point of writing is to help people feel what it's like to be in their shoes. And so it's if we can help them do that, to see, I think that it makes a difference. But I want to hear more about the whips.
No, I mean, really. No, I really can't actually tell you more, because I can tell you that there are 3 kinds of orcas that live in the Pacific Northwest. I'll just quickly tell you this because this is a fun fact. The coastal orcas, they mostly spend their time in the wide ocean, and they eat sharks and other mammals. Then there's the big transient killer whales. And at one point, people thought all of these whales were the same whales, so they were so abundant. That's why there wasn't more of a outrage when they came in and stole so many of them to put them into SeaWorld and other aquariums around the world. And then the southern residents are a fish-eating ecotype. And one of the ways that they study the health of this population is to collect its scat, which they do with this amazing dog who smells the scat, and then they go scoop it up. But what I learned is that the transient killer whale poop, and they eat sea lions and all sorts of other things, it sinks too fast because it's dense, so they cannot do the same techniques. So if you want to learn, and they're not endangered, so I don't even care about their scat, but just so you know, if you are trying to get scat of a killer whale, it has to be a fish-eating one, or you're not probably going to get there in time before it sinks. That's all. Aren't you guys glad you came today? Just not, I mean, if you could leave with one fact and then all these other facts, I mean, your night is pretty much made. Mm.
Do you have something to read?
Do you want me to read first?
I would love for you to
Okay,
read first.
all right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read first.
Okay, guys, go for it.
This is not about orcas, though, because I have lots of work to do still, so I'm not so long. Come up here.
Okay, perfect.
Oh my gosh, I think I just got my 10,000 steps. I did! I have a new Fitbit, and it's so exciting, and it it just says, "Good job, Kate," a lot of the time, and then sometimes it says, "Not good job," and then I feel really sad. So what I'm going to read is actually a little piece. So I've done a lot of work with writing about motherhood, and I teach motherhood in words. I've done that since 2006, started at the Loft. But I used to work for Literary Mama as a volunteer editor, and was on their board briefly as well. And this is from a new anthology that's coming out next week, and it's called A Labor of Love, and and hopefully Majors and Quinn will carry it, but it's not available quite yet. So this is called My Girl. It's super short. So I've been working on a lot of essays rather than longer stuff right now. My Girl. It wasn't a boat really, but a raft. Only 6 of us aboard, including the captain. So I was relieved to be within arm's reach of the life jackets. When we caught air, hitting a huge wave on our way out of the harbor, I squealed, grabbing the bench with my right hand and linking my left arm with Zoe's. My instinct to protect her, as strong as it had ever been. Zoe didn't pull away, a good sign. I planned the mother-daughter trip, just the two of us, because the year had been a difficult one. For all of us, for the world, but especially for my younger daughter. There was the city redistricting that forced her to give up her tight-knit K-8 community to navigate a mega school for 8th grade. There was trying to juggle soccer and dance, each vying for more and more of her time and attention. Panic had taken root, an insistent fist in her chest, an invisible hand at her throat. And then there was COVID still, and the never-ending Minnesota winter. It was all too much, and I hoped the warmth of Southern California would melt away Zoe's new mask of sullenness. I started talking about the boat ride, the search for sea mammals. See, this is tied in there. As soon as I bought our plane tickets. But each time I mentioned it, Zoe shrugged. I'm not that interested, she'd say. And I'm good. New code for no thanks. But there was no way we were not going to go. We were heading to the ocean after all, and what better way to get out of a funk than to lay eyes on graceful, wise sea creatures? So I pulled out the well-used trick from toddler parenting days. I gave her two choices. The 3-hour boat ride, I said, or the 1.5-hour one. She chose the latter. It was chilly on the water, but the sun was shining and the captain had cranked the music, classic rock that soon morphed into Celine Dion, because he insisted that dolphins like Celine best. I hoped he was right. The passengers from the earlier trip hadn't seen anything other than a heap of lazy sea lions on a floating dock in the harbor. The raft hit wave after wave as we headed farther away from shore, and I began to relax into the rhythm of it, loosening my hold on Zoe's arm. It felt good to be on the water and out of our comfort zone. And maybe the salty air and glinting waves would be enough to reignite the spark in my girl's eyes. But wouldn't it be even better and more powerful if we actually saw some dolphins? According to the ancient Greeks, dolphins swimming in a boat's wake was considered a good omen. To the ancient Romans, dolphins symbolized resurrection. And throughout history, in many cultures, dolphins have been considered rescuers. I'd certainly heard the stories of swimmers being protected from sharks by dolphins circling them for hours until help arrived. I thought about Zoe over the last months, spending hours alone in her darkened bedroom, refusing outings and games of Catan. I'm good, she'd reply again and again to suggested movie nights. But was she good? Was she okay? I emailed therapists and then more therapists, only to have her put on one waiting list after another. I began waking in the middle of the night, glutted with worry for her. We could both use a little rescuing, a little resurrection. Suddenly, over choppy waves to the left, I spotted a colony of birds diving into the water. Is that a sign? I asked the captain, and he nodded, already turning the boat in that direction. And there they were, dozens of sleek, God, oh my God, I was like, almost started to cry. This is so weird, guys. This is my obsession, clearly, of things, and this is even whales. Dozens of sleek bodies arcing into sunlight, gray and white flashes above dark water, so joyful, so playful. Zoe pulled out her phone, smiling the way she had when she was younger, her whole face lighting up. All at once, time reverses itself, and Zoe is 2 years old, racing down the sidewalk, toddler legs pumping as she looks over her shoulder, laughing because she knows I will chase her. She is 6, twirling, leaping, sashaying through the house again with that laugh. She is 8, slipping into an accent, any accent, as she flounces across the room, hamming it up. Lunchtime, the captain shouted, slowing the boat, and suddenly we were surrounded. Dolphins leapt everywhere, spinning circles in the water, swirling huge schools of silverfish to the surface. Lean over the edge, the captain said. We got down on our knees, draping ourselves over the rubber rim of the raft. Flashes of silver and gray, white bellies exposed below the surface, a whirling dervish. Wow, Zoe said, snapping photos. The captain spun the boat around, and there were more dolphins orbiting another tornado of fish. The other mother and her 2 teenagers made room for us at the bow, and Zoe and I leaned way over, not afraid at all now, because how could we be? 6 or 7 dolphins raced just beneath us, then surfaced almost within reach. On either side of the boat, more, hundreds. There was no way to count. I laughed, giddiness bubbling up and spooling out of me. Zoe gasped as a dolphin leapt into the air just in front of us, and I knew she felt the wonder too. It was as if we were courting magic. is this what the Romans meant by resurrection? I turned to see Zoe's wide, Jesus, I'm so sorry. This was not expected. I turned to see Zoe's wide smile, her eyes crinkling in the corners, her long red hair streaming behind her in the wind. This is amazing, she said. Indeed it is, my girl. And for that moment, at least, nothing else mattered. And just so you know, I got her permission before this was accepted. She read it, she okayed it, she okayed me reading it. Like, all is good in that front.
Now you guys know why I'm such a fan of kids. Like, and going back and rereading all of your stuff for this talk tonight, and I've always heard you like give student talks or whatever about like ways to be able to reach back into the past when you're in the middle of a moment, like how to be able to do that effectively, because it's really hard to be able to like write a scene and then like know when to pull back and get that depth. And it's like right there, you just did it again. And it's like this is why you get such acclaim. So thank you.
Look at, I didn't even see the thing. I love your slide. Wow.
Yeah, I like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's all you have to say. Yeah.
All right, you read for us now.
Thank you. It's a little bit different. Different subject matter, not as many kids. Yeah. So I gave you the background of how Louise started with her writing, not writing, but writing. And once she knew how to ride, let's go and take off now. Once she knew, oh, I better do this. So once she knew how to ride, she took day trips with her club. And she was getting the feel of the road, yes. This is from her first solo trip, proving she could take it. And those words were in the 1935 Motorcyclist. She did this 148-mile ride to Jamestown. But it didn't have the picture there, so it's like people couldn't, like, seeing her on the bike, and this is her first bike, like you get a different feel than just reading the news. So here she is getting the feel of the road, but still staying close to home with the day trips in order to care for her mom. After her mom died, though, those trips extended into overnights. And accounts of her travels kept showing up in the Motorcyclists, but she wanted to include the auxiliary too. Not just their pretty picture. Look at this word that they used in the 1935 Motorcyclists. Not just their pretty picture, but what these women did mattered, she thought. So in 1940, her new auxiliary got that recognition. They were named third in the country after much bigger cities like San Fran. But note what is not in this picture. What is not in this picture is the safety banner that Louise helped earn with the thousands of miles that she'd ridden. The AMA determined that that belonged only to the men's club. Also, there's no auxiliary president here. Gladys was still down in Daytona. She had ridden down in a car as a passenger, unlike Louise, who 2 years before had driven the 15,000 miles solo, starting in a January snowstorm, with ice sheeting off her creosote at stop signs. So 1940 was a big year. That spring, Louise got her third and final bike, news she kept secret for months from her friend Helen Kiss. Louise wanted to surprise her when they met up in Laconia. The bigger surprise at that year's motorcycle week was seeing so many women riders in one place. They'd come hoping that after 3 years of recruiting, a 51st woman motorcycle rider would finally join, and that was 51 was the number needed to qualify the motor maids to have a charter as a national auxiliary. So Dot Smith, this is Dot right here, is a member of the second place San Francisco Auxiliary. She was that 51st member. She won a prize for coming the furthest to the Raleigh Manor Woman, and she was also in the running for Best Dressed, along with Louise and Helen Kiss. For the contest, Dot Smith wore this get-up that was like a majorette costume, definitely not the kind of gear you want to wear for a long ride. But the competition was so close that the AMA ref had to defer to audience applause in order to decide the winner. And the audience picked the more practically dressed Helen, who won the award at Daytona that year, and had beat out Louise at the New York Fair before that. Helen wore an updated version of what Louise had worn in an earlier contest. And Helen beat out Louise again, as well as Motormade president Dot Robinson, at the first national women-only competition the following year, a competition that had been Louise's brainchild. Dot had been the one to beat ever since she set a transcontinental record with her husband. In the years since, she'd become something of an influencer, which is why Harley Davidson, the company, handed the Robinsons $3,000 in order to start up their Detroit distributorship. Louise, in contrast, in 1940, lost her job at Kodak, and her husband, a pipe coverer, lost his too. It's awful to be poor, she wrote her friend Bernice, and not be able to go everywhere. Louise in time found a job at a home for women with developmental disabilities, and pinching up pennies to still take some solo trips. Averaging 85 miles to the gallon, she managed to remain in the running alongside who else but Dot Robinson for racking up the most miles of any woman in the country that summer. Louise wanted that sporting trophy bad, and she wanted more for the women who loved motorcycling as she did. Her auxiliary, the Wacamo Pals, held a reliability trial at the end of that summer, and then afterwards overnighted at Silver Lake, where one of the women had a cottage. Louise pitched her idea there for an all-girls show, not the kind with silly contests that the AMA suggested, but real challenges by real women writers. This idea from the woman who once worried what ladies at work might think about her writing. But doing stunts and promoting them was in her blood. Her father, after all, was a well-known stunt barber. Her vision of an all-girls show got the okay from the AMA if she limited invitations to within the state. So Louise reached out to the secretary of every auxiliary attending New York district meetings, to any woman in the state mentioned in the Motorcyclist, and to any woman she ran into in the rallies. Many found it hard to get away from home, though, even with the pals offering them a place to stay. Those willing to come remained shy of competing. "I've never tried anything like that before," a woman from Niagara Falls confessed. Yet she was willing to try. "Put me down for anything but the stunts," she said. Women had come a long way from the years since Louise started writing. Women now won awards for wearing pants for the writing outfits instead of being arrested for that. Yet still, AMA rules prohibited women from racing. Louise, having won or placed in several slow races across the country, including at Laconia, didn't view this as a limitation. You learn to be a better writer, practicing control through slow driving. That's how you begin building skills needed to perform trick writing. That's what I'm doing. I'm just practicing my slow writing. Okay, so road experience helped too. That summer, Louise kept driving, in part to stay miles ahead of these high schoolers who were right behind her in the activity contest, and in part because she loved it so. When Louise drove to Blue Mountain Lake for the weekend, Margaret went to Massachusetts. Phyllis drove a buddy rider to the New York Fair. On the way home from upstate, Louise stopped in Syracuse to see a hill climb and see friends old and new, and some fellow charter members of the Motormade, as well as Phyllis and her mom Bernice. Louise was growing a soft spot for the girl, her closest competitor and a fellow published writer. At Phyllis's age, Louise had only dared straddle her sister's boyfriend's bike. That's it, just straddle it, like not ride it, but just straddle it. People were worried about women having leg parts over the bone-shaking contraption, and Louise always said, well, what about horseback riding? And why it wasn't an issue for the men too, we don't know. Anyway, so at Phyllis's age, Louise had only dared straddle the boyfriend's bike. Phyllis had been riding tandem for years before she rode solo. The motorcycle had been the family's only vehicle until the fourth kid in the family was born. No wonder the teen rode, the whole rest of the family rode in the sidecar. So no wonder the teen rode easily with the sister on her shoulders. Louise knew the crowd loved them. So for the first all-girls show, the weather was perfect for a parade through town and into the fairgrounds where the stands were packed. The showcase began with a patriotic drill by Louise in red and the girl Mickey in white and Phyllis in blue. Then Mayor Lux gave a welcome speech touting the AMA mantra of safety first, encouraging attendees to not speed on the way home. Louise had a Newark duo played between events with the women playing an accordion and a trombone, which apparently was perfect accompaniment for the day. The show featured an Econo run as well as some trick riding and a uniform contest, of course. Louise divided the categories into one for riders and one for drivers, which is something the men's club had yet to figure out. She planned the show down to every last detail, but that didn't keep her from competing. In the balloon busting contest, she won the tiebreaker. Per the AMA designated rep, Gladys. For the Scotchman's Derby, Louise completed 27 laps on the given amount of fuel, just ahead of Mickey. The winner was Mickey's sister-in-law. She continued on for 2 more laps. Mickey won Best Dressed Driver, and 25 women competed for Best Dressed Passenger. A rearview mirror went to the winner of the slow race, who belonged to one of several pairs of sisters in the auxiliary. The men did all the setup and show running that the girls usually did. Louise had set out pages and pages of instructions for Phyllis's dad, who was a founder of the Wayne County Club. And Louise was like the mother of a newborn, writing out what a grandmother of 20 should do with her latest grandbaby. So for the grand finale, Louise and Mickey's sister-in-law, and Phyllis and her 10-year-old sister, wowed the crowd with several stunts. Phyllis would later win stunt competitions against men in a stunt perfected under the war's blackout rules, and that is riding with a bag over her head. And please don't try this at home. The following weekend, Phyllis rode sidecar as her dad drove to Ohio for the National Championship Endurance Run, and Margaret rode to Massachusetts through another reliability trial on the back of her boyfriend's bike, and Louise rode that contest too after a solo trip to the Catskills. All that was left for the year was a masked Halloween party and a month full of turkey runs. As rules had it, all the miles the teens rode sidecar and buddy seat counted the same as the miles Louise clocked riding solo. But driving to a meeting in a car earned members 5 less points than driving on a bike. And for the last regular meeting, Louise couldn't get her scout to start. Her neighbor had a habit of leaving their shared garage door open, which left her bike too cold to start. And he left the door open again, which bumped her to second in the contest at the end of the season. Louise hadn't complained about Phyllis getting all the points for the Ohio trip when Don did all the work. She hadn't complained about Margaret getting points for riding tandem with her boyfriend to Massachusetts, and in that last reliability run in which Louise placed 3rd overall against the men. But for these girls to get equal points for riding in a sidecar or buddy seat the whole time she was riding solo, and for her to lose this way, her frustration got the better of her. Poor George, one pal said to another. They knew Louise. They knew she wasn't happy. It got back to the coals what Louise said about how the family usually got what they want no matter how they got it. An end-of-year Wayne County event brought in more than 40 riders from 5 clubs, the most of all the runs that month. The Waccamo pals spread out sandwiches and coffee and sweet cider for all who came, but Louise was not among them. She had refused the 2nd place trophy for the activities contest and dropped her membership of the pals. She had the motivates now. Phyllis was only 15 and did not gloat about winning when she wrote the article for the paper. Instead, she acknowledged how Margaret Johnson had been greatly handicapped in the contest last days, given the sudden death of her father. Phyllis won, and Margaret just 15 points behind. At the pals' Christmas gathering at Gladys's, each woman got a pin for riding without accident that year, and the club received a 2nd safety award banner for members traveling a total of 214,000 miles, counting the auxiliary. So much of the buzz around the club and the pals the past year had come from Louise's contributions, and now they'd have to continue on without her. But Louise would also have to go find a way to go on without them. It's true that Louise had high standards. She knew what was fair. She knew what she wanted out of a club. The stand that she took regarding awards was a matter of honor in her time. Similar stands were taken at the local and national level by both men and women. The second time Louise turned down an award from Wayne County, that following spring, she was out camping with Phyllis and others just a few weeks later. A matter of honor that she left these other clubs, and that she had her falling out with Dot Robinson over what the Motor Maids board members ought to pay individually and what should come out of the auxiliaries' coffers, which led to Louise's painful departure from the Motor Maids. It what spurred her to move past national limitations and ultimately found the Women's International Motorcycle Association, which finally fully encapsulated her vision for an inclusive club for those who simply love to ride. Through all this, through sudden deaths, marriages, babies, and terrible violence, Louise remained tight friends with Phyllis and women like her in upstate New York, Ohio, Canada, Great Britain, Germany, Australia. Women from all these places made one pilgrimage after another over the years to see her, even after Louise could no longer ride. At least one got to see Phyllis, as a dairy farmer, how she got her cows to come home with the help of a motorcycle. So what brought these women from across the country and from around the world to Louise's door? Why would she entrust her photos not to a museum and not to WEMA, but to a different motorcycling friend, not a Hall of Famer, but a citizen writer? The answer you'll find here in these pages, in these pictures, and in her heart. Thank you, guys.
I think we have time for a few questions.
Yes, please. Yes. If anyone has questions. And I also want to let you guys know, because we do have a board member from WEMA here tonight, we do have cards and information about WEMA too, if you're interested. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so how big were these motorcycle clubs in this era? Was this like a really well-known
It was a
activity around the
big
country?
thing, and they had a lot of fun with it. Like they would be like riding stops where they would and like shoe scrambles where they would take off their shoes and leave it like at the other end of the field, and then they'd get on their bike and get their shoe on, and then like ride the bike back. It was like all these things that like just why not do today? And there would be the Whack-A-Murphy, where you'd be riding along and like you try and swing a bat and knock a potato off a stick, or like carry an egg on a spoon, carry it across it, or who could go like as close to the line as you could, like you'd ride up to the line and stop right before the line, kind of thing, as quick as you could, you know. So like all these like fun games that you would do, plus the sack races and other things like that. They had a lot of fun, and it was cheap fun during the Depression. You see these pictures, and there are pictures in the so there are. I shared with you guys like 50 pictures today. There are over 260 pictures in this book, so that's kind of, so it's like there's so much here, and you can see the big crowds that they would have, and it was through these this was when Joe Petrali was a really big racer, and so he won he swept all the competitions in the 1930s, and so Louise was there to see him win all these races, and so it was like it drew huge crowds and thousands and thousands of people. So you think of Depression like of all these bread lines sort of thing, and yet there's these huge crowds of people just having fun, having picnics, watching these hill climbs, and so you know, so that was fun to see. Yeah, yeah. So you'd form it, and the Wayne County Club was is among the oldest in the country. There's only one other club, I think Yonkers, is older than it. And Fritzy's Bears, who was this really famous distributor, in the picture of Helen Kiss had the picture of Fritzy Bear with her. And he had the distributorship right connected to the Indian manufacturing facility. And so his club didn't go through the wars, because a lot of clubs stopped during the war, and so for Wayne County to continue meant something, and they would pay the memberships of the guys who went away in order to make sure that they would still be able, know that they were welcome when they got home. And so they were really community building places. You had to have like 11 people in order to have it fun. And these people at their height would have, well, it was like you could have 35, and people would come from all over. Like the guys from Massachusetts would come over and come to the beach for the rallies, and just a lot of fun. It was like, oh my gosh, this is just so much fun. These things that they would do. Yeah. Run.
The Indian motorcycle was the big one to begin with, and then Harley Davidson came along. Was there any? What was the feeling about my bike's better than your bike kind of thing? Was that an undercurrent?
Totally.
I mean, people do that today. Pickup trucks. I mean,
Totally, yeah. Yeah, and through the Depression, there used to be Triumph and Excelsior and a bunch of other makers. And through the Depression, Harley and Indian were kind of the ones that made it through. So Don had his shop, and he came from miles around. He ended up having the effects from his shop have been at the Curtis Museum of Motorcycling and Aircraft. Curtis designed engines for both bikes and aircraft, and his museum is not far from the Wayne County Club. And so Don Cole's, Phyllis's dad's stuff has been at the Curtis Museum for 13 years. They're like, we're just going to show it for 6 months, and they ended up keeping it. So, and he wrote this long letter about why Indian was so much better than Harley. So he was kind of biased. And so for Louise's George to have a Harley and for her to have an Indian, it's really unusual time to have one of each side in one household. So yeah, that rivalry was there right from the beginning. Yeah. And you'd have, and there was a woman who Louise kept her columns. She was writing in the 19-teens, and she would go out writing for 2 hours before she'd go to work in the morning, just because she loved it. and she'd write for it, and so she was kind of part of the Harley promotional thing. And it was sort of a thing, like if women could ride, look, if women can ride, you can too, guys. So they were trying to play that up too. Yeah.
You might have referenced it a little bit, but it sounds like they were accepted by some men who were motorcycle enthusiasts. But was there a flip side too? This is not terribly ladylike? What did you learn about that?
That was very much, well, and that was part of the thing with the motor maids. It's like they wanted, they were ladies. They wore white gloves, and they rode. They rode in parades. And it was like a huge, and because so few women rode, I mean, it took them 3 years to come up with 51 ladies from across the country who rode. And so for their first event, they rode 2x2 into the Columbus track. And so to see all these ladies come around on the track wearing white gloves, that was a big deal. They're known for their uniforms today, but they didn't have uniforms until the mid-50s. But they were very much like they have to be ladies, and so Dot was very much, she knew about the power of public perception, and so when the AMA started this thing about who's the most popular and typical girl rider, it was this competition they had, and you saw one of Louise's friends was Anne, ended up being one for 1952, I think. She wanted to make sure that image was controlled, that the motor maids would, they would get the power behind the motor maids, that might be a motor maid who might get elected instead of a woman who just was pretty and might not necessarily have writing experience. Because Phyllis, Marion, Phyllis's sister, the little girl in the picture, she was a contender for also a typical and popular girl writer, but she only listed that she'd been writing for 6 years, but actually she'd been writing since she was a baby. It's just like she'd only been driving for 6 years, where these other women, they didn't even mention their writing experience at all, and you know that if that was the case, they weren't writing at all. So, because women were proud of the writing that they did. And Dot Robinson, her dad was the guy who invented the sidecar, and so she was writing before she was born because her mom went to the hospital in a sidecar. So yeah, so it was, yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
To quote, good job. And we'll be coming to Booksellers.